The ideational metafunction, also called experiential, is responsible for construing our collective experience in one way or another. Such experience ultimately shapes our perception of reality because such reality is often affected by the way we talk or write about it. I have a question for you now. Would things exist if we had no names for them in our language? The answer is probably yes and no. To some extent, one can say that many things around us can be created by a simple act of naming, and the way we choose to name things is going to affect how those things are going to be perceived by people. For instance, does this picture show mountains or hills? The answer is not clear-cut, right? We all know that mountains are taller than hills, but how tall does a hill need to be in order to be called mountain? Our perception is going to be affected by others choosing to call them mountain or hill. If we want to understand how the ideational metafunction operates in one particular text, we need to pay attention to how things are called. We need to focus on the processes, the participants, which can be people or things, and on their circumstances. Processes are usually codified as verbs. Participants are worded as nouns, and circumstances are usually adverbs or prepositional phrases. There can also be qualities involved. If the qualities are associated with nouns, these would be codified as adjectives. If they are associated with verbs, they would be codified as adverbs. So, depending on the language choices one makes, our reality can be shaped in one way or another, as we said before. Let us compare the following headlines. Which one do you think is most government-friendly, and which one is most critical? You can compare the lexical choices being made with respect to the participants, those mentioned and not mentioned. You can also compare the processes and circumstances. All these choices result in radically different representations of reality here. For instance, headline A speaks of hordes of illegal aliens. The alternatives in headlines B and C are groups of immigrants and refugees, respectively. The word hordes has very negative connotations. It is usually associated with very large crowds perceived as frightening or unpleasant. Illegal aliens are foreigners, possibly from ethnic groups different from the locals. The word illegal implies they may be breaking the law, and aliens can be considered dislikable or even frightening. The phrase groups of immigrants is more neutral than hordes of aliens. Immigrants can be defined as people who have moved from one country to another without necessarily violating any law. Only if we add the adjective illegal, the picture changes. Last but not least, the term refugee portrays a far more sympathetic group of people deserving our care and compassion, as they have been forced to leave their home or country because of war, political or religious persecution. If we now look at the processes, there are also noticeable differences in the headlines. The term arrest is different from detain. Only the police are entitled to arrest people on suspicion of a criminal offense being committed. The meaning of detain, on the other hand, is more general. Detain can be interpreted as arrest, or it can mean to stop someone from doing something. Immigrants may be detained, but one would seldom use the word arrest with them, as migration may not necessarily be considered a criminal act. Forcing your way into our nation is radically different from trying to cross a border. The former implies some kind of violence, even the invasion of one's nation. Crossing a border is much more neutral. It does not carry such strong emotional overtones. The word nation is quite rich in meaning. It can be interpreted as place, but also as a community of people associated with a territory. The last example, which talks about refugees being beaten and arrested, sounds pretty terrible, and also highly unlikely, doesn't it? In this case, there is also a participant missing. The headline does not mention who beats and arrests those refugees, but the implication is that the police may have been responsible for that.